Sure. My name's Justine Bennett. I grew up in a small town in British Columbia, Canada, called Silverton, BC, where a lot of expats from the US went during Vietnam, my dad being one of them. And my mom, she grew up in Manhattan and was kind of an anti-war activist and ended up there too. My mom took a course in Berkeley called Primal Scream. It was really hot in the 60s, early 70s apparently. I guess a way to get out stuff that's just kind of trapped inside. And her teacher was Ronnie Gilbert of the Weavers. She was teaching Primal Scream in Berkeley at the time, and a whole crew of people that my mom was in Canada with, I think, traveled there to take the course. And then Ronnie ended up deciding to come back to the valley where my parents lived, and she lived with my parents for a summer, I think, in their house before I was born. But I did meet her a few times in Berkeley later on in life, and it was really sweet and inspiring and really fun to do Lonesome Traveler and have her be a central character. That was really cool to see. Yeah, definitely. My mom was an avid supporter of all things music. She was a piano teacher. She was a substitute teacher at school. She always found a way to bring music into every situation. She taught kinder music, which is music for for young kids, and yeah, she encouraged me to sing whenever I could. I started singing in coffee houses at the age of 5, and I sang in the choir my whole life. She played the piano for the community choir, and so it just sort of was part of us, everything that we did. How did I find out about Lonesome Traveler? I'm trying to remember, but I think Polly mentioned it when we were playing a show at Zoe's. And then I knew Brendan for a few years, just in the music scene, and then he mentioned that he was going to audition, and I think we were playing the same show that night or something, and so I just decided to go for it. It just kind of sounded like my calling. Like I missed that era, that whole era of music being alive. So I just wanted to experience it and sing those songs. And I remember actually when I got the call that I got the part, and I was working as an extra on a shitty TV show. And I was in the parking lot, and I had gotten up at 4 in the morning, and I was just like, what am I doing? I hate my life. And then I got the call that I got the part, and I was elated. I was so happy. And it was really the beginning of a new sort of move to just primarily doing music for my life's work. Yeah. I didn't. I couldn't go to New York with Lonesome Traveler. I sent my girlfriend Jamie Drake instead. But I got asked to be a singer, guitar player for Adam Cohen, who is Leonard Cohen's son. So we did a big European tour together, and then a leg through Canada and festivals, and we played a show in Greece, which was kind of the highlight of my life, with the Greek Philharmonic, singing his dad's songs. It was really amazing. So I was really, really sad to miss it, but it was kind of an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. It feels so good. It feels so good to be back with Lonesome Travelers. I was saying today when we finished our 7 days of rehearsing that I've never been in a musical group where there is not an ego to be found, and where everybody just does their best to lift the other person up. They put everything into every song with everyone so that everybody can be lifted, and it's just an amazing feeling. That's why we're all here. You know, like we all have super busy lives and are doing a bunch of things, and somehow we all manage to make time to cut out a week to do this with each other, because It's just you can't get that feeling anywhere else, I don't think. Sure. Well, let's see. I'm singing a Neil Young song called Helpless. I don't know. That song has just always been with me. I've been singing it for years. You know, the opening line, there is a town in North Ontario. I guess I just connect to that because I'm from somewhere else. I'm from Canada. And I think it sort of speaks to what it's like to sort of lose your youth and not be able to turn back time. And we all feel like that. So, you know, it's a collective message. I'm a huge Neil Young fan. So it was just sort of a culmination of, I already knew it, I love him. And I just also, I think a lot of people feel really helpless right now. So I felt like it was a good song to bring to the table. I guess the only other one that I brought so far, because I've got a bunch, but we didn't have time to work them all out. Brendan and I had worked up a version of Dirty Work by Steely Dan. And it's just a really fun song. It's a fun song to sing. It's a fun song to listen to. The chorus is great. And I just thought it would fit well in with the whole set of songs. I guess it doesn't really have a particular message, except it's somebody saying that I don't want to be in a bad relationship anymore. And I don't know why I keep going back. And I think that we can all relate to that too. I certainly can. Just that the music that we're singing and playing is so relevant right now. So it's really cathartic to be singing the songs, and this week has just made me feel better about life in general. So it's been really fun. I can't wait for the show. I've been in LA for almost 8 years.
Oh. I thought you just came in from Canada.
No, I feel like I am half Canadian, half Californian at this point. I've been here long enough.
My name is Anthony Mano. I was born in Washington, D.C., and my love for music and theater actually began there. I'm a graduate of Duke Ellington School of Performing Arts as well as Howard University, but the first time I ever remember singing was actually in grade school. I went to one of the local Catholic schools there, and we had a teacher who was actually a student at Howard University at the time who taught piano and as well as singing our choir in the Holy Redeemer school. And so one of my first singing jobs was as a singer in the boys in the choir. I wouldn't say I was very young when I had it, though. That's relative. But anyway, now my first Broadway production, I actually got very, very lucky to do. I was one of the first members hired outside of the original Broadway cast of The Lion King. And I went from there to do the Broadway revival, millennial revival of Jesus Christ Superstar. Now that's a really tricky one because I think James O'Neill, who's the artistic director here, he gave me a call and he basically asked me, you know, do you play guitar? I was like, well, yeah, I can mess around, you know. What do you need? He said, well, have you ever heard of a guitarist, singer named Leadbelly? And I was like, no, I can't say that I have heard of him, but I mean, he said, well, if you could do some research on him and get back to me with a couple of songs. I appreciate, you know, we're trying to do a show here and, you know, we appreciate you. We were trying to see if you want to be involved. Well, I looked up Leadbelly and, I mean, I have to say that I was really kind of blown away because I was like, here he is playing a 12 string, and I was like, I have enough problems with 6. He's got 12. He's got 6 extra. I'm like, okay. I wound up going out and purchasing my own 6-string and working up a couple of tunes, and was just fortunate enough that Jim liked what I did. So, a few shows that I'd done prior to that one, prior to Lonesome Traveler, was Songs for a New World by Jason Robert Brown, and I was one of the muleteers in Man of La Mancha. I know. The songs that I brought, interestingly enough, I got a call from both Carolyn and Jim when they were on their way back from, I guess, Kansas or somewhere. They're always traveling around, you know, but they were on their way back after having been excited or motivated about this new project, and they asked me basically if I wanted to, or to look for some songs for this particular show, and I said, sure, I guess I can, you know, fish around, and because there's from where Lonesome Traveler seems to leave off in 1965, there's like a bazillion songs that I just either heard or, you know, I can't say my parents or anybody would sing certain things, but certainly people in, you know, school or work or, you know, certainly had large musical influences on me. And of course there was DC Public Radio as well as the regular radio, which played, you know, anything from Motown to R&B and classics. We had a station called DC 101, and they would basically, this is when Howard Stern was not the Howard Stern. He was actually a shock jock and would often, you know, have people call in and, you know, just talk for what seemed like hours, but with probably only minutes. But I grew up listening to DC 101, and that's how the Stones, the Who, Jefferson Starship, you know, my influence of rock and roll came from listening to that station. My influences for soul music and R&B music came from listening to 92.3 WKYS, which is another DC R&B and soul station. They're now a hip hop station, but then it was something else. But one of the songs I brought was an Otis Redding tune called Dock of the Bay. And one of the interesting things that I learned about it was that, you know, Otis was not necessarily known for doing, you know, he was known as a soul singer and not really a folk singer. But interesting thing about that song, he was either at a folk festival or some kind of festival, and somehow or other that song, or being around those musicians, he started opening up to another genre of music, and that song was recorded anyway just before he passed away.
Especially.
Man, I don't know how long we have, and I could sit here and tell you about songs that, for example, when I was a kid, there was a song by Bill Withers, Ain't No Sunshine When She's Gone, which often reminded me of my mother for some strange reason, being an only kid on my growing up, and so that basically was, you know, how music was an influencer or just a comforter for me, because, you know, your parents aren't home, you can listen to a radio or listen to records and things like that. And so I kind of grew up listening to a lot of music and stuff. But the other song that I brought as far as the show is concerned is Painted Black by the Rolling Stones. And that tune, believe it or not, the interesting thing about it, because it's such a mesh of songs, it doesn't sound like any one particular, you can't put your finger on, oh, this is just rock and roll, oh, this is just, you know, a folky kind of tune, but it has such a wide variety of influences on it, and yet the message in the song, even though I don't know if Mick was singing about, you know, either Kennedy or Robert Kennedy who had been assassinated, or JFK, certainly, you know, and not long after them, you had Martin Luther King and other influential people from the 60s and 70s and during the civil rights movement that were assassinated. But certainly this song seemed to give kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Just kind of a breath, if you will, as if someone has, you know, been ignoring something for a very long time, and all of a sudden there's this welling up of energy, and this song seemed to allow that energy to just come out of them. And it is amazing that it still has, for me anyway, the same effect it used to have on me when I was a kid hearing it for the first time. And I've always, you know, dug the Stones. They certainly are, you know, iconic, and rightfully so. They've, just like the Beatles, they've made goo gobs of music and influenced, you know, just music itself, you know, for decades now.
My name is Sylvie Davidson, and I grew up across the Puget Sound from Seattle in Washington State. Oh, definitely, yeah. I grew up with parents who had a really big record collection and a love of Judy Collins and Joan Baez and Gordon Lightfoot. And my dad is just a little bit older than Judy Collins, and he remembers seeing her in a bar somewhere in Colorado, a tiny little bar before she was famous, where he had to have a fake ID to get in, and she was younger than he was, but she was singing there, and he always called her Judy Blue Eyes. He loves her, so I grew up listening to their music. I heard about Lonesome Traveler because Dan Wheatman and Jim O'Neill were in Seattle auditioning, and I hadn't heard about the auditions, but I was in a play at a theater run by two women who are good friends with Dan Wheatman, and so he took Jim to say hi, and they said, "Did you audition Sylvie?" Because they knew that I played music and sang, and Danny called me and I went in the next day, and I'm so glad. Oh. Both really amazing. You know, I've worked for 10 years as a professional actor, and getting to go do a show off Broadway in New York and live in New York while doing that was just magnificent. And meeting Peter Yarrow was, I mean, I cried the whole time. The thing that I remember the most about what he said was that he thought that there was a black hole of empathy in our country, and that music and hearing music together, playing music together, singing together when you get an audience to sing really helps heal that, because when people all feel together, it reminds us how alike we are. And everything he said reminded me that, or made me feel like that was my purpose in acting in and singing, was to help people feel together. Well, it's sort of continuation from Lonesome Traveler, but beyond, because there's so much music that came right after we ended Lonesome Traveler, that it's hard to encompass all in one project. Doing this workshop has been really interesting, because we all just kind of got to bring the songs that we were interested in and then see what a through line might be with those. There's definitely, I know a lot of us are feeling like a lot of the protest songs or the songs encouraging that empathy that I was just talking about really resonate now. So it's finding the songs that resonate with us and understanding, exploring why. Yeah. I brought a couple. I suggested Get Together, and I know I wasn't the only one who suggested that. I have been actually thinking about that song for a couple years because it just, I knew it as a kid, and I reheard it a year or 2 years ago, and I heard it differently because the chorus says, come on people, smile on your brother, everybody get together, try to love one another right now. And I heard the right now differently than I did as a kid, that there's urgency in that. It is about loving each other, which is a very peaceful sentiment, but there's urgency in it, which I know they felt back then, and I think we all feel now too. So that one I felt really strongly about. I also brought Woodstock, which was written by Joni Mitchell. She recorded it. It was also recorded by Crosby, Stills, and Nash. But I like Joni's version. And the story with that is really great because she was on her way to Woodstock, but she couldn't make it. And she ended up watching Woodstock on a TV in a hotel room. But she wrote this song that just encapsulates not only Woodstock, but I think the whole feeling of that era. People walking together and remembering that we are all stardust, that we're golden. You know, it's a really beautiful song, and I think sometimes it can just seem like it's just about Woodstock and just that one experience, but I think it encapsulates so much more, and it's still so powerful.
Is there a second song?
Oh, Different Drum. Yeah. I brought three. Different Drum, which was written by, I'm probably going to say his name wrong, Michael Nesbitt from the Monkees. And it was recorded by a bluegrass band in 1965. And then the Stone Ponies had a hit with it in '67 with Linda Ronstadt singing. So it was written by a man. And there are the lyrics, when you think of a man singing it, for instance, you cry and beg and, no, I'm going to say it wrong. You cry and moan and plead, it will work out. But honey child, I've got my doubts. That one, and also, no, I'm not going to remember the lines.
The When You Buy You Aren't Pretty?
That's one of them, yeah. Now I ain't saying you ain't pretty, I'm saying I'm not ready for any person, place, or thing to try to pull the reins in on me. When you think of a man singing it to a woman, it's a narrative that we've all heard a lot, and a story that annoys women. But when a woman sings it, it flips it on its head, and I'm sure was novel then and is still fun now. And so I enjoy the fact that they had a hit with it, with a woman singing it that was written by a man. Yeah. The very first round of Lonesome Traveler in 2011, about 6 years ago now, before I came down, one of the women who suggested that I audition for the show found out that Trevor Wheatman was also going to be in the show, and she is very close with his family, so she knew him, and she came into our dressing room. We were sharing a dressing room in a show, and she said, Sylvie, Trevor Wheatman is in that show with you, and he's your soulmate, and you're going to write music and travel the world together. And I said, oh, whatever, Jane, I don't believe you. But of course, then I was kind of waiting to meet who this Trevor Wheatman was, and it turned out that she was right. And I think we knew it within 3 or 4 weeks, and we got married a 1.5 years ago, and lots of the Lonesome Traveler people were there. So yeah, and beyond that, I mean, Lonesome Travel will forever be special to me because I met my husband. But beyond that, it's such a close-knit family. We are all family, and there are people that are going to be my friends for my whole life. So, and that is really, really special. It's really special. Wow. It means, well, it means so many things, but I think the main thing is that when you hear music or when you sing together, or you listen together, that you feel together, and it reminds us how connected we are. You know, you can look over and see a stranger and you know what emotion they're feeling. And that's so important, especially right now, that we remember that we all have those feelings, you know, that we all feel, and that connects us. It's easy to forget, and I think music reminds us really clearly.
I am Jennifer Lee Warren, and I grew up in Dallas, Texas, born and raised. Dallas, Texas, I've been everywhere. New York, I went to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. I've been all over the world, lived in Japan for a while, and now I've settled in Southern California. I am so lucky to have been asked to join the company of Lonesome Traveler. They actually had started, and they needed a replacement, and I got this call to come in and meet with Jim, and I think Carol Lynn was there, and next thing I know, they asked me to be a part of it, and I feel so blessed that that happened. Oh, Peter Yarrow. Oh, come on. I mean, come on, it's Peter, Paul, and Mary. Come on, what are you talking about? He's so kind and so smart. That's the thing that impressed me. Just a brilliant man, and to hear him just talk off the cuff, I'm the worst at that. But then to sit there and listen to him and to hear from him how important and how happy he was to see this show. And I remember talking to him about how I was leery that New Yorkers would not want to sing along, because we'd done it in all these other places, and they'd sing along and have a good time. We were shocked. New Yorkers were like right there singing, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is great. And and Peter was excited about that, and he was excited about the show, and talking about folk never went away. It's still here in various forms and whatever, but there's just something about them, that whole folk era. So it was amazing. I loved meeting Peter and talking with him and performing with him, and yeah, it was a great experience. The first song that I brought was Vincent. It was just a beautiful song, and I hadn't really even thought about it in years. And then a friend of mine, we were talking about these possible songs, and he said Vincent, and it just struck me. I was like, oh my goodness, how could I not remember Vincent? It meant so much to me when I was in school at Dartmouth. This kid who's coming from Dallas, Texas, going off to New Hampshire, and it's freezing cold, and you just feel kind of lonely and alone, and the words. I just remember that song, and I just remember that song just kind of keeping me going. And I know it seems like a really sad song, but for me, it just wasn't. So I chose that, and then we were working on songs, and George Grove and I were talking about it, and he pulls out a guitar and he just starts playing it with me. We chose a key, and it was just interesting to be able to stand there and sing that song with George Grove accompanying me. The second song I chose was Lean on Me. I don't even have to explain that. That's just if people don't know what that means, that song, Lean on Me When You're Not Strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. There's just this song about friendship and love, and that's why I chose it. It's hard for me to even fathom the world without music. I don't know. It's like my arm. What does my arm mean to me? It's part of my life. Music and the arts are so important to us, to our hearts, to our humanity, to I don't know, that's just a difficult question for me. I never even thought about what does music mean to me. It means everything. Singing and songs and lyrics and being able to touch someone and I don't know. What one thing, if I could change one thing in the world, right? I mean, that is so a difficult choice. The only thing I could say is empathy. People could be more empathetic or pick up a damn dictionary and learn what empathy means, you know? And that to me would help in all the other changes or other things that we would be wanting in the world. Just think about someone else instead of yourself. And that's what, sometimes that's what music does. That's what protest songs do. It's about standing up for what is right and caring about your fellow man and woman, so.
My name's Nicholas Monjardo Cooper. I'm from New York City originally. I lived there for 27 years before coming out to California, and I have very much felt like a man without a country ever since. I miss it here when I'm back there, and I miss it there when I'm here. So they both provide a lot of different types of artistic communities, but all very gratifying. I come from a family of musicians. Both my parents are classical musicians. My father's a harpsichordist, pianist, and conductor, and arranger, and my mother's a soprano and a singing teacher, and both those history and abilities came in mighty handy in my training as an actor and a musician in terms of timing and musicality. And man, what a fun way to grow up. I grew up in a household surrounded by the arts, and I think it's immensely important to support young people when they want to pursue careers in the arts, but to have it ingrained and organically that way from your parents was something for which I'm extremely grateful and extremely fortunate. I remember flipping through, this will tell you how long ago it was, a paper copy of Backstage and seeing a posting for appointments in New York for Lonesome Traveler, and having a affinity, though not an expertise, but a love of folk music. I sent my information in, and the next day I got a phone call, and I went downtown with my 12-string guitar and sang Green, Green Rocky Road for Jim O'Neill in a studio in New York. And 2 days later, I was home in Los Angeles, and I got a phone call saying, would I make a tape for a callback? And I said, I'm more than happy to make a tape, but I'm actually back in Studio City, about 40 minutes away from the theater. And the next phone call I got was from Jim himself, who said, come on up. And we spent about half an hour reading some pieces on the history of folk and making some music together. And it was real kismet that we were able to meet twice in the span of 72 hours on both sides of the country. There was an extraordinary thing that happened when I joined Lonesome Traveler once I got past being positively petrified that I was going to be fired. A lot of that had to do with the fact that I was used to my guitar and music skills being special skills, things that were additional to my acting, and to show up with a group of people that were so expert, so exceedingly skilled at musicianship was very intimidating. But we formed an incredible group together, an immensely, I would say, fortuitous musical blend of 9 people. And I learned so much, not just in content, but also in practical ability from working with people like a band. So I got a real history lesson, a real artistic lesson, and a real collaboration lesson from the experience of Lonesome Traveler. And it was a gift that kept on giving for years. And when we landed in New York, and Peter Yarrow was sitting in the third row of 59 East 59, and I looked out there and thought, at the end of Act 1, and thought, crap, in 30 minutes I have to come out and sing Puff the Magic Dragon in front of this guy. Once I got past the petrifying sweat, it was a really phenomenal opportunity to perform for him, and then to have him share with us his stories of performing in various situations, but primarily those associated with the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Movement were. It was obviously extremely exciting to perform with Peter Yarrow for Peter Yarrow, but to stand and be told stories by Peter Yarrow about his experience, particularly in regards to the Civil Rights Movement, was inspiring, especially as we look forward to what I think are going to be darker times before they're lighter times right now. It was immensely inspiring and motivating in terms of awakening both the artist and the activist in each of us. So the first song that I brought was something that Dan will tell you, it has an immensely joyous effect on me. It's one of those things, it's a song that makes me smile even in my darkest moments, and it's a song by the Mamas and the Papas where the incomparable Cass Elliot sang lead on Make Your Own Kind of Music. And in addition to it being a tremendous message about expressing your individuality against augury, it became an anthem that got adapted and adopted. It became an anthem that was adopted by the gay rights movement, that Cass Elliot was such an enormous and important figure to a lot of people struggling in that period, to be recognized for their individuality, to be recognized for being different. And Make Your Own Kind of Music is a song that is both joyous, but very accurately explains the kind of loneliness and the kind of difference, the kind of ostracism you feel when you feel different. And I think the thing I connect to most about that song is that we've moved in an age, it seems politically, from when the goal was simply assimilation, that there were movements that felt like, we're just like you, so you have to accept us, have kind of given way to something that I find a little more empowering, which is, you know what, we're not like you, and that's okay. We can all exist together. We have to have an understanding. But the song, Make Your Own Kind of Music, is exceptionally realistic about how difficult that's going to feel. You will feel alone. You will feel, as she says, nowhere. And to do your things, the hardest thing to do. And it is, to stand up and be individual and be different and in many ways unappealing to a mass public. It's a difficult thing to do, but it does result in an immense amount of joy and a feeling of community. So that's how that song got its way to me. Another song that I sing that has been part of my life since I was a teenager at a hippie summer camp was For What It's Worth. And the Buffalo Springfield recording is iconic, if just for the harmonics on the guitar alone. But it spoke of a generation and of something I only learned recently was that the initial incident that spurred that song took place in Los Angeles, not in San Francisco, which was thought of as the city of love and the whole kind of apex of the protest movement, but that it had way more to do with the Love-In in Elysian Park in Los Angeles, that song did. And so my connection to LA, which is fairly recent, got a big bump from learning that about that song. And especially, excuse me one second. Especially having had the experience in Los Angeles that I did in the last month, which was showing up to the Women's March, surrounded by 750,000 other people who were some born and raised Angelenos and many from all over the country, people who had come to Los Angeles for the arts and the community there. But to see suddenly an America that I admired and recognized, of people pouring into the streets to speak their minds. The thing that I love about For What It's Worth is that it expresses both the power of coming together and protesting, but also the danger that comes with that. That it is important that you understand exactly what the risks are, and that the risks are worth taking.
Okay, so let's do that.
I mean, the other things I get to sing. I get to sing Garfunkel on a couple songs, and that is to me an unparalleled thrill. Having Simon and Garfunkel being the first exposure I ever had to folk music, and that I fell asleep every night to Simon and Garfunkel's greatest hits. So the ability to sing those high parts on America and The Boxer is just an absolute thrill to me. Of course, what those songs meant were less clear to me at the age of 11 and 12 than they became in my 20s and now my 30s. But it's an absolute thrill to be able to sing those harmonies. The other thing that I had brought in that we'll be looking at going forward with Dan Wheatman was an opportunity to medley two songs together, which is something we treasured being able to do in Lonesome Traveler the first time around. And Neil Young's Sugar Mountain, which is a song he wrote about his favorite old haunt as a musician that he wasn't allowed to go back to after the age of 21. And he was really depressed that he couldn't do that. And Joni Mitchell heard that song and wrote a response, and her response was the song Circle Game. And while his was this kind of stream of consciousness despair of getting older and not knowing what to do, hers was both realistic and hopeful. And to me, it was an immensely gorgeous combination. And so I've been looking for ways to combine those two songs, Sugar Mountain and The Circle Game, which were, written within a year or two of one another.
Sure. My name is Justin Flagg. I'm from Long Island, New York. I studied at the Royal Conservatory of Scotland. It was called the Royal Scottish Academy when I went there. And at Interlochen Center for the Arts in Michigan. And most recently I went back and got a second bachelor's at the New School. Well, let's see, it's about 6 years ago now, I guess. I got an email from my agent with a breakdown for the show, and the message from my agent said, "Does this seem like something you'd be interested in?" And I read the breakdown, which was, folk musical, role of Pete Seeger, has to play the banjo. And I thought, gosh, my agents really don't know anything about me, because yes, obviously this is something I'd be interested in. So that's how it happened. I went in, I sang, I think I sang Talkin' Union and maybe So Long Marianne, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I played the banjo and I played the guitar. And then I put something else on tape to send to Dan Wheatman, who wasn't there because it was just Jim was in New York. And that was that. And that was I think that was like a Tuesday. And then on the Thursday, I got a call that said, "We want you to come to California the following Thursday." It was very last minute. Yeah. Well, I mean, my knowledge of folk music was not nearly as advanced as it has become through this process. I think I came back to folk music. I guess my parents, had listened to a lot of the stuff we're doing now, a lot of folk rock stuff, and Kingston Trio, Gordon Lightfoot, Pete, Chad Mitchell Trio. They had all these LPs when I was a kid, and they had listened to when they were in graduate school. And they had a little black book of chord charts for a number of songs. So when I was maybe 14 or 15 and I started to want to learn the guitar, I busted out this book, and it had the Eddie Stone Light in it. It had I can't remember, there's other very obscure now folk songs. But then I went through a sort of a more, I don't know, rock and roll phase when I was learning the guitar in high school, and then it was watching "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," which I think brought a lot of people back to, you know, American roots music. Although I had played a lot of Simon and Garfunkel when I was in high school. My musical partner and I, so my buddy Matt and I in high school would play a lot of Simon and Garfunkel. You know, it was perfect for two guys. He would play the guitar, and we would sort of trade back and forth who was Simon and who was Garfunkel, and you know, it was popular with the girls. Not that we got a lot of girls, but we got enough. We got one. So and he and I have continued to play together now. You know, that was probably 18 years ago that we started playing together, and we still play together, and we have a band. So, you know, I wasn't quite as deep into the folk music, but certainly it's always been around. Yeah, I think I mean, I've always been interested in politics, but I think I have become more active. I lived in Britain all through the Bush years, so I was a little removed. You know, I was sort of in exile and didn't have to face it quite so directly. But moving back, I slowly became more aware, and I went to the Pete Seeger's 90th birthday concert, which was in 2009, and I read a review in the New York Times afterwards where they said something like, you know, nobody writes protest songs anymore. And I thought, well, I'll show them. So I wrote several. One's on our first album. And that song, Seeds, is called, as kind of a tribute to Pete. And then I was involved occasionally in Occupy Wall Street. And that was a sort of awakening. It's sort of, you know, I was already moving in that direction, and I sort of felt like I really couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore, and that drove me to go back to school to try to get more directly involved in social justice and you know, moving society in a better direction, which is what I'm doing now. I mean, I do that through my music as well. I wrote a song the day that they evicted everyone from the park at Occupy Wall Street. People sort of scattered, and they regrouped uptown, maybe 20 blocks or so north of where the park was, where there was a little bit of space. And, you know, it was a leaderless movement, so it was not quite clear what to do, but we all sort of felt like, well, we've got to go back. So we started marching down Broadway, and we took over the street. And it was an amazing feeling. You know, it was peaceful, but it was disobedient. And we were, you know, walking down the street chanting, and there are people watching from the windows, and it was just a great feeling because nobody gave us permission to do that, and nobody stopped us. We were the society, and we made that decision that the streets belonged to us. And I wrote this song, "We Won't Go Away," that we're doing in the show. It has a line about, I've heard the crowds of the old and young when the steel canyons echoed with the songs that were sung, and the streets were filled and the law was undone. And that was an amazing feeling to know what our power is as people. Well, I brought the boxer. That was one of the first songs that I learned with my friend Matt, and that we would sing constantly. And the same is true with America. That whole Simon and Garfunkel canon was really meaningful, and I think maybe Paul Simon and Leonard Cohen as well have had a great influence on my lyric writing style. Just I won't compare myself, but what I'm aspiring to is the simplicity that Paul Simon in that period had, and the way that he is able to convey a real deep meaning and emotional meaning with very simple words, workaday words. We bought a pack of cigarettes and Mrs. Wagner pies. It's so quotidian and kind of boring, and yet in that there's so much pathos. I think it really connects to people. I think it's a very American thing. It's like Hemingway, and the same is true with Leonard Cohen. So I brought "So Long, Marianne," and I think he's much more poetic, intentionally poetic than Paul Simon, early Paul Simon. But it's still the same thing. It's pared down, not a lot of verbiage, but the words are so central. Particularly for Leonard Cohen, he started out as a poet, and then he added music, and in a way the music was just carrying the words. And of course the music itself, though also very simple, is very moving and complex in its simplicity. But his lyrics say so much with so little, and I think particularly "So Long, Marianne" certainly brings back memories for me of a certain period of my life that those words really ring true for. Particularly the final verse, "Just when I've climbed this whole mountainside and washed my eyelids in the rain," that feeling of like, I thought I'd gotten over you, and then you show up, and I have to do the whole thing again. It's really powerful stuff. And then the last one I'm singing is "Peace Train," and we went through that today in the room, and I just thought I've never really, I've never sung it, I've never performed it before, and so you listen to the words in a different way when you're actually singing them. And I realized that the words are a lot more positive than I had always thought. He says, in one point he says, I've been sad, but the majority of the time he's saying, I've been happy lately, thinking about the good things to come, which when I listen to it, that's not what I have heard in the past. And so I had a brief moment of thinking, this maybe is not appropriate for this period in time, because I'm not happy now. I'm not thinking about the good things to come. But of course, then that is the most appropriate. It makes me think about what Pete would say about performing to an audience that seems unreceptive to your message, is that those are the people that you have to sing for. There's no point in preaching to the choir. Those people need to hear the message. And in times when it doesn't seem like there's anything to be happy about is the time when we most need to focus on those good things to come. Sure. Well, so right when Lonesome Traveler came to New York, I had just started working for a state senator in New York City. And so I've been there now for a few years. And I do communications and environmental policy with her. And, that's been a real learning curve, and it definitely has its ups and downs. And we lose more than we win, particularly these days. And it can be a real slog nowadays going to work. But, I think in many ways aside from playing this music with this group of people, there isn't anywhere else I'd rather be, because I know that I'm in the right place. I'd be following the news anyway and just getting depressed. So I might as well then at least do something about it. It's been a very interesting experience being on the inside. I never thought I would go to work in the New York State Senate. Is notoriously corrupt and dysfunctional, and it is those things, definitely. But again, that's where good people are needed, and that's what I aspire to be and to do the good work.
My name is Trevor Wheatman, and I am from Aspen, Colorado. I'm currently living in Nashville, Tennessee. I am, and possibly third. My grandfather, I think, was a singer, but not professionally. But I'm a second-generation professional musician. Sure. My dad started playing music professionally, I think when he was about 19, in the Los Angeles area, and moved to Aspen, Colorado, where he met my mom, and then joined John Denver's band and toured with John Denver for about 9 years, I think, world tours. And my mom was also at the time in different bands in Aspen, Colorado. And so I grew up in a household with a lot of music and instruments laying around, and I was allowed to think that it's okay to be a musician, which I think a lot of my peers didn't get that latitude, that you can do this for a living. I think last count I play 11 instruments, and it's a little bit of a cheat because I play guitar and I play dobro and bass, which are very related, and I play mandolin and banjo and violin, and mandolin and violin are also the same family, same fingering. I play piano and accordion, and I play some drums. Pretty much anything that I can get my hands on and have at least like a month or two to mess around on, I'll be able to fake it a little bit. But yeah, my main instruments are probably piano, guitar, and violin. Well, I became a part of Lonesome Traveler mostly because of nepotism, because my father was hired originally to be the music director, and he thought that the show could use somebody that was more focused on the music part and not so much the acting. And that has been, for me, since then, sort of a career path in theater where I supply a lot of music, but not so much acting, which I love to do. But he thought the show needed, a little more like a band, or it's just someone that could switch instruments around. And so that's how I got hired originally to do the first Lonesome Traveler. This new Lonesome Traveler 2, as I've been calling it, it's about the next generation of music that came after where we ended Lonesome Traveler 1, which was 1965. So this takes up where that left off, and so much changes at that point in the music industry. And so this is a way to explore, this new show is a way to explore that diversification of music. And it's a lot to ask, and it's a big question, and that's really what we're focusing on right now, is trying to figure out how to tell that story at least concisely. At least that's what I feel like that's the challenge, is there's so much came out of that folk world that now it's a matter of trying to define the terms and and tell a story about how that happened. As it exists now, I think we're just trying to pick great songs that we like and try to tell a story about those, because that's really all you can expect, I think, is you can't try to attack it all in one show. It's too much. So as it is now, yeah, we're just trying to pick good songs and tell stories about them and let the songs tell their own story too. The songs I brought originally have changed since we started, and that's partly to do with my expectations, not understanding what this was going to be about. I was originally focused on making sure that songs that I thought about were very much relatable to folk rock. However, now that we've sort of expanded the definition to just include music that we liked from the 60s that move us, the songs I originally picked were The Boxer by Simon and Garfunkel and what's my other one? Oh, it was originally Blackbird by the Beatles. And then I added, the James Taylor song became, oh, I'm sorry, my original one was Carolina on My Mind, which then became You've Got a Friend in Me, which happened naturally because Carole King wrote that song, and Carole King is a major contributor to the music of the 60s and 70s, and I think it became a better choice. For me, James Taylor, I mean, I can remember around the age of 8 years old hearing his voice for the first time, and it was, I don't think I understood the songs probably at that point, but the tone of his voice totally captivated me, and still does. And so he is a major influence on the songwriting that I have done, and I wanted to include him in this show as much as possible. And the same for Paul Simon. Not his voice so much, but I think with Paul Simon I was starting to hear the lyric a little more and the storytelling and the flow of his songwriting. So really any Paul Simon song or James Taylor song for me would fit this project just because of the style and the purity of the writing and the singing. And outside of that, honestly, there's so many songs and so many reasons that it gets. I could maybe sum up one thing about this era of music that I think makes it special is that it was a time in music history where the record executives and the people with money were they were just saying yes to a lot of stuff because they didn't know any better. There was this new music coming out in the 60s and 70s. There was psychedelia. And they didn't know. They just, they thought, okay, that'll maybe sell. And they actually allowed this stuff to hit the market. And that's why I think there was a proliferation of really interesting, heartfelt music in the 60s and 70s. And it started by the late 70s and the disco change. It started to turn a little more corporate, and the people that were actually saying yes to projects were mostly concerned about whether it would sell, and so they start asking it to be like the thing that came before it, and the thing that came before it, and you started getting carbon copy problems, and that's an era we're still living with, especially in country music, I think, where from song to song, if you listen to a country station, I mean, almost they sound like the same song, And so in the 60s and the 70s, up until the late 70s, really, they were just saying yes to a lot of stuff, and it was able to flourish. And I think that's a defining factor when you look at the two eras, and it allowed a lot of freedom of expression, and people, tried whatever, and I think that's one of the spirits I think we're trying to capture in this concert. And maybe people don't think about it in those ways, but they can tell the difference between songs that came out in the 70s and 90s, Even kids can tell the difference. I am very blessed that I met my wife, Sylvie Davidson, in the first run of Lonesome Traveler here at the Rubicon. And it's a little bit of a love story, I know. But we actually, I think, fell in love on maybe day 3 of rehearsals. I think that's about when it happened. But we've been together now 6 years since the first Lonesome Traveler, almost 6 years to the day, really. We're getting very close. This is being March 18th, I think. And yeah, since the first Lonesome Traveler in Ventura, have pretty much not left each other's side in 6 years and plan not to ever again. I moved to Nashville with Sylvie about 3.5 years ago, and it was for songwriting, basically. Songwriting, or in Nashville, songwriting is a major industry and a major there's a major network to be had tapping into it there. And I had met over the years, probably starting 10 years ago, I started meeting songwriters and being involved in that world. And every time I would play my songs, they would say, you should move to Nashville. And it took about 8 years of hearing that until I finally thought, maybe I should move to Nashville. And when I met Sylvie and her songs were so great, I told her maybe we should move to Nashville, and she just said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And I was like, I didn't really think you were serious. And we sold all my guitar collection of about 25 guitars and raised other money and just, rented a truck and moved out to Nashville. We're hardly there right now, but it's a good place to be if you're trying to be a songwriter.
My name is James O'Neill, and I am from Santa Barbara, California. My dad brought this music, the music of folk, into our house when the Kingston Trio hit in 1957. I was 5 years old, and they were playing all the songs of Woody Guthrie and the Weavers before them, and the Carter Family, and a lot of old songs. And my dad, that was my dad's time, and he was so excited that that music was coming back. And it did come back. It hit in a big way. And so he bought all the records, all the albums, and he brought that music into the house. And it got under my skin, as they say, because that's what happens to 5 to 8 to 10-year-olds. So Lonesome Traveler came about because I felt like the ethic of that music had not been celebrated properly and had not been remembered in a long time and not been performed the way it had been performed in that day for a long time. And I felt like we needed to remember that. We needed to remember a history that I didn't remember even before the great revival of the late 50s and early 60s. And so I set about researching where that music had come from, and then created the show. Well, it was long. It started in 2007, just with research. And for a couple of years, that's all I did was read books and, find out things that, I didn't know. I thought I knew a lot. I did know some, just from having listened to the music when I was a kid, but there was a lot that I didn't know, and I found that out by reading and researching. And that was a couple of years, and then I started writing in 2009. The first copyright page is 2009. And we finally presented a version of the show, the first version of the show, here at Rubicon Theater Company in 2011. So that's now 4 years after I even started to think about it. And then in 2015, 2 years ago now, we took the show to New York, and we played it off Broadway. We had played a couple of dates in between with the show in Santa Barbara and in Laguna Beach before we went to New York. And we played 7 weeks in New York, and we were nominated for a Drama Desk Award and a Outer Critics Circle Award against Hamilton, by the way. And of course we lost because it was Hamilton. And now we're doing nominally, the sequel. It could be thought of that way, but in 1965, when we ended the first show, with Dylan's taking up the electric guitar at Newport, from that point, there was an explosion of creativity, an explosion of energy. And the music went in so many different directions. It's like a supernova exploding. And so I had not been able to think about how I would the first show was structured as a history. And that was the essential story of the show. But this show couldn't really be a history because there are 20,000 histories from that point on. So now we're in the process of exploring what that is. Well, Trevor Wheatman, who is in Lonesome Traveler, he was primarily a musician. He did a little singing, but he was primarily playing a lot of instruments in the background and backing up as a band sort of would. His dad is Dan Wheatman of Marley's Ghost and toured with John Denver for many years. Trevor, as many of the group, has a sort of history with this music. But he's a cut-up. He's a funny guy. And he brings a sense of humor and an irreverence to it that I really appreciate. Brendan Willing James, who played Woody Guthrie among other characters in the first iteration, Lonesome Traveler, is a killer guitar player and singer and songwriter, as is Justine Bennett, who played Judy Collins and many others, Joan Baez in the first iteration. The same ethic, they came from the sort of, the clubs, and they weren't really in the theater, but they learned from the process to be in the theater. But they bring that sort of care to it and incredible talent. Sylvie Davidson is not only an incredible songwriter and singer and player of guitar and slide guitar and all kinds of things that we asked her to do.
Sorry, do it one more time because we had that.
Sylvie Davidson who's Trevor's wife, by the way, is not only an incredible singer and songwriter and a player of music, guitar, slide guitar, whatever we asked her to do, she could do. She is a consummate actress. And so I had asked her to play multiple roles in Lonesome Traveler, including Ronnie Gilbert from the Weavers and other roles in the second act. And she brings a commitment of heart to it that's very special. And Anthony Mano, a fabulous I would say luminous talent, both as a singer and as an actor. He played Leadbelly in the first show. He's going to sing Paint It Black and Sitting on the Dock of the Bay in this second show. Jennifer Lee Warren, a voice that can't be matched. Who am I leaving out?
Justin Flagg.
Oh, Justin. Well, all I can say about Justin Flagg is that, well, I can say many things about Justin Flagg. Justin played Pete Seeger primarily, for the most part, in the first act of the first show. And he not only brought the skills of a terrific actor to that challenge, but also he learned to frail on the guitar, on the banjo, inside of 4 or 5 weeks. I mean, you can't do what George Grove from the Kingston Trio learned, that Justin had learned what he learned on the banjo in 4 or 5 weeks to do our show. He could strum it when he first started, but he didn't know the frailing part, the picking part. And George from the Kingston Trio plays the banjo in the Kingston Trio now, said that can't be done. But Justin did it. So, if I hadn't had Justin in the first show, I wouldn't have had a show.
Nick.
Nick is a soaring tenor and also a basso profundo. So he played Lee Hayes in the first show from the Weavers, who was their bass singer, to perfection. He's also a fabulous actor. And in this second show, he's singing the high parts that Art Garfunkel sings in the Simon and Garfunkel stuff that we're going to do. So I don't know where you find a voice like that, where you find somebody who has that kind of range and can sell it. And Nick is another fabulous actor. Well, actually, probably 10 co-creators, because the cast is bringing their ideas to the process too. And because it was this, I felt like it was this explosion of energy and creativity, and I didn't know what direction to go in. I knew that I wanted to make, fairly early on when I was doing the research, I knew that I wanted to make Lonesome Traveler a history, but I didn't know what direction to take this, in what direction to take this. And so I asked everybody to bring 2 songs to the initial rehearsals and workshop that they cared about the most, and they did. And out of that, I hoped we would come up with some kind of idea of what the show will be. And I think we're on our way. So I met Dan Wheatman 6 or 8 years ago. We were doing a show here at the theater about John Denver and his music, and Dan had been in John's band. And when I had the idea to develop Lonesome Traveler, I knew Dan's history with the theater and developing shows for the theater that had to do with music and music history. And all of that, and then had the great good fortune to work with him in with the John Denver show, and I knew that Dan was the guy to do this music because he's 5 years older than I am, maybe 3, 4, 5 years older than I am, and so he was not just feeling it as I was as a teenager or a young person. He was actually starting to live it as someone who was doing music at the time. And I knew he would know all the songs, I knew he would know all the groups, I knew he would know all the history, I knew he would know so many things that I didn't know. And so it's just so exciting to have been able to work with Dan once on the first show. He's so easy to work with, and so accommodating, and so knowledgeable, and then to have had that experience, and then to be able to move into this experience as sort of colleagues in that way, having already had another experience. Well, George Grove came to the Laguna Playhouse when we were doing the first show, Lonesome Traveler, 2012 or 13, something. And he loved the show. He brought a bunch of people, his wife and Cindy and some other relatives and friends. And he fell in love with the show, and he plays banjo now for the Kingston Trio, and he stood in the lobby and talked to the cast, and they were all excited at the time. And he came to New York for our opening night and participated with us then. And now I just recently went out to Las Vegas, where he lives, and met with him about a list of songs. Well, there's only about 1,000 songs, and there's only about 200 groups, and that we have to consider. But we sat for an entire afternoon in my hotel room in Vegas, and just talked through the time, the era, and lots of stories about those times and what songs were being written and why and all of that. And we came up with a list of songs, and lo and behold, some of the songs that the cast threw at us, as I spoke of before, were on our list. So that's good. And so we're all coming together on it in that way. And George, well, George is, he's another person who is so passionate about the music and the ethic of the music, and has such a long history with all of that, that I feel very blessed to have him with us.
I'm Brendan Willing James. I'm from Los Angeles, California. Maybe you've heard of it. Yeah, a lot of people ask me that question, how I came into music, thinking that I've been doing it my whole life, and I haven't. At this point, it's been a while, but it was late. I was in high school. I was about 15, and my father had been in the band Montrose in the 70s. He has a lead vocalist, and so he toured with them for 5 or 6 years, did a couple albums with them, but it was before my time. Like, I didn't, growing up, I wanted to play Legos, I wanted to play Matchbox cars, I wanted to do, build stuff. I wanted to be a kid. Like, music just didn't do anything for me. I don't know. And then one day I had some friends in high school who, they both played guitar and they wanted to start a band. And I was like, well, that sounds fun. I want to hang out and be in a band too. What is that all about? And they already played guitar, so they're like, "We have to play the bass guitar." I was like, "Well, okay, whatever." So my dad bought me a bass guitar, and I jumped right in. Like I'm kind of obsessive about stuff once I start it, you know. But it's tunnel vision. So I jumped in. My mom gave me an old acoustic guitar when I went to college, and so I started writing songs on that, playing open mics, and then I started my first band called Shades of Day. When I was in college, and then from there it just snowballed. Yeah, I was in Isla Vista, which is in Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, kind of an offshoot. And the band was playing at like a pizza place, you know, like just your classic early pizza place gig. And I was walking back to my apartment from there with the drummer, and it just hit me. I was like, I'm gonna do this my entire life. It was like that. I mean, I was 20, you know, like it wasn't early for me. Like I was 20, and that's when it hit me. I was like, here I am a couple years into college and saying like, yeah, you know, screw this. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to do music. And so I continued going to school. I continued working. I never graduated. You know, I left school to do music full time. You know, and I've had to work lots of jobs. I worked at Trader Joe's, I worked at Costco, worked at supermarkets. I've, you know, done tons of odd jobs to get by, and music has sustained me, not always monetarily, but that's just the way it is. You know, that's art. It's like you can't really count on it to be there, so you have to do other stuff to do what you love. And I've never had a problem with that. So that's really, you know, that's when it hit, and it's like it's never gone away, and in fact it's only become more and more intense as I've gotten older. It's like there is a pressure that comes in, you know, every year if you're not making a lot of money. You have family saying like, are you still doing this? Are you gonna get a job? You know, you have friends, you have, you know, social kind of pressures that happen, and you have to fight those off. And that's my to me, it's my strength, is like I'm able to focus on what I want, what I said I wanted when I was 20, coming from that pizza place. You know, I was like, this is gonna happen, you know, like for better or worse, it's gonna happen, you know, like I don't have a plan B, you know, that's the thing. Like, people say, hey, what are you gonna do if this doesn't work out? I'm like, what do you mean? It's gonna work out. It is working out. It's what I love to do, and like, you know, anyway, that's where I'm at. Here I am today, still doing it. Well, Lonesome Traveler, let's see. That came in, so it was about 6 years ago. 6 years ago, 2011, there was a friend of mine named Chris J. He's a local writer, musician himself. He was in a band. Anyway, he contacted me out of the blue and said, hey, there's this thing. It's like he wasn't sure what it was. He was like, it's a music thing, like they're doing, it's kind of folky, it might be a little cheesy, I don't really know. Like he didn't really sell it, you know. He was just like, but they'll pay you, you know, a certain amount of money a week just to play music. I thought it might be up your alley, you should check it out. I was like, at the time I just made a second record with my band who didn't want to tour, you know, they didn't want to go do it, and I was like, okay, you know, like I'm looking for a music job, sure, you know, it fits into the whole thing. Like I was like, yeah, I'll do it. You're gonna pay me to play, sure. So I came here and auditioned a couple songs I had no idea how to play, playing the banjo, which I had also no idea how to play, and I didn't know what I was getting into. You know, it's like I didn't realize it was a musical even. I had no idea, you know. But then I was offered the part to play one of the, you know, a major role in this musical theater production, and then found out I was gonna have to play Bob Dylan, which, you know, was one of the scariest moments of my life. I was like, what? Am I gonna learn how to play harmonica? So anyway, yeah, that's what it was. It was just a friend let me know that I guess the Rubicon was looking for a person who was me. We were talking about this the other day. As we've been practicing the crew, the cast, We were talking about blues, I think. I think we were talking about blues, like when was everybody influenced by the blues? And for me, it was also very late. It was 10 years, 15 years after I started playing music. I never really played the blues. Didn't know about it. I didn't listen to it. And the same thing with folk. Like Lonesome Traveler introduced me to Woody Guthrie. To Peter, Paul and Mary, to Bob Dylan. I knew obviously a little bit. Everybody kind of did, but I didn't know much of his story. I just knew Bob Dylan. He's the guy. He's a public figure. Everybody knows him. And playing music, like I had known about him, but I was never a big fan. Of any of the folk artists portrayed in Lonesome Traveler. I didn't know about it. And once I opened my mind to it and had my mind open to it by everybody and having to play the role of Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan, it was absolutely life-changing. It was like this is where the music that's important to me and even to my family and to my friends, I don't know anything about it. So it was doubly inspiring for me to go and learn it, besides having to get on stage and actually play these artists who, in a convincing manner. I took it seriously, and I dove into the history of all kinds of the artists, portrayed and alluded to. And I feel like in my music now, it's storytelling-wise for the most part. Vocally, I'd been singing rock and roll. Like I could sing a lot of things, but I wasn't very good at telling a story with my music. And I think that's one thing I'm really thankful about Lonesome Traveler for is introducing me to people whose main goal was to tell you the story. They didn't care what their vocals sounded like. They didn't care if their guitar was in tune. Sometimes it's like, here's the story. This needs to get across. And same thing with musical theater. Here's the story. What are you trying to say? That's, to me, has been huge, in my own artistry and music. Sure. So the songs I brought to the folk rock project, one of them is "You Don't Mess Around with Jim" by Jim Croce, which is kind of funny, because I don't think it's about him. It's about a badass dude who's king of the town, gangster maybe, and this other guy comes and basically becomes the top dog. I just think it's a song I've been playing for a long time. Well, not a long time, but a few years. And I came across it because there's a song that I wrote called Sugar High, and it had this kind of chink, 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 this kind of thing. And then I heard that song, which I had heard kind of growing up here and there, but I didn't know much about it. But it had the same kind of feel, and so I just learned to cover it. And then from there, I got into Jim Croce, and realized his, amazing music, but also his tragic, story of how he flamed out really early. But and he was going to be, James Taylor. He was on par to be a really huge folk artist for his whole life. And the legacy he left is these, a couple albums, like these few songs that are just, you hear them all the time. Leroy Brown, Don't Mess With Jim, Operator. Beautiful songs. And so that's one that I brought just because it's been part of my life for a few years and kind of a go-to when I play live. Like, I don't do a lot of covers, and that's one of them just because it's fun to sing, But yeah, and so that was one. And then another song that I brought to the project it's called The Envoy by Warren Zevon. It's a very simple, it's very direct and to the point kind of song. Zevon lyrically was just, he was a powerhouse lyricist. Like he knew how to get his point across. His story I could talk about for 6 hours or so. Really interesting life and musician that guy is. But I ran across the song actually when I heard about this project. I ran across the song. I'd never heard it before. I know some of his catalog. And this song comes along in a time of, just heavy political, fighting, and really kind of everything's really scary for a lot of people. Like, there's a lot of threats going around, there's a lot of nationalism, there's a lot of espionage, there's a lot of, you know what I mean? Like, well, you don't know what I mean? Because Okay, yeah, there's a lot of lying, there's a lot of bullshit, if I may, like people just posturing and just trying to get their way and not really thinking about anybody else, not really thinking about the things that were fought for, and freedom, and things that this country is about, and that we're trying to, as musicians, and as not just musicians but good people, we're trying to make the world better, and there's a lot of people who are trying to make it more exclusive and worse for some people and better for those with more, essentially. So this song comes along, and it's basically just, it's talking about, I think it was 1972, fighting in the Middle East, the Syrians, the Lebanese, the Iraqis, and then it talks about what happened in El Salvador. It talks about the CIA, and those are lyrics in the song. And to me, like, to hear that right before I came into this project was like, this seems like a no-brainer to me. Like, why did this song come into my life right now? And it's not something I would ever cover, ever sing. It's just the weirdest song. It's totally out of my range. It's so simple. It's not something I would write. And that's what I loved about it, was that it got me out of this comfort zone of just like, let's do this song, So I brought it up to everybody, and it went over really well. So it's it's going to be in there, and it'll be a really cool, heavy-handed moment. There's a lot of beautiful music that happens, already in this, whatever this is going to be. But this one is not beautiful whatsoever. It's an ugly, like fist to the face kind of song. So yeah, I'm excited. For the last few years, I've been in a band called Grizz Folk, which isn't folky at all, which is the funny part. It's a rock band, kind of electro rock. There's synthesizers and electronic drums and pop songwriting, stuff like that. I came into it. A few of my friends from LA wrote a song called "The Struggle," and that was in 2013. And that song got picked up by a blog, and all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands of people were listening to this song. And at that point, the singer of the band, a friend of mine, his name's Adam, he texted me, he's like, "Hey, what are you doing? I know you're super busy, and but would you come and play some bass and sing so we can do a couple of live shows?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds fun. Send me the music." So he sent me "The Struggle" and 2 other songs that him and these 2 Swedish guys, producers, had written, Fredrik Eriksson and Sebastian Fritz. They had kind of created this sound and didn't know what it was going to be. And so we started playing live, and just within a matter of months, the band was signed and on the road. And it didn't stop for 3 years. We put out a couple of EPs, we put out a full-length record. We toured Europe, we toured Canada, we toured the US a number of times. We played The Late Show with David Letterman right before he retired. We played Conan O'Brien. We did just tons of cool stuff, and it's still happening. We're been creating new music, and I've been part of the writing process for the second go around, which has been really a lot of fun. So we'll see where it goes, but that became part of my life as anything. Like, hey, just like Lonesome Traveler came in and Grizz Folk came in, it's like, you want to do this? Absolutely. I try and say yes as much as possible to things that sound like fun.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me, what's happening here today?
We are continuing our work on the folk rock project. we've sort of decided on some tunes. Now we're just going to be going over the arrangements. I think my friend who's a drummer is coming in to like play along with us a little bit today, and you know, another giant step forward for folk rock.
What are some of the tunes?
Get Together by the Youngbloods, Make Your Own Kind of Music. Something's happening here, For What It's Worth. Woodstock. That's just off the top of my head there.
And what's the theme of the show?
What's the theme? Well, we are discovering that as we go along. It's all around the folk rock music and the explosion that happened in the music business in the sort of mid-'60s, where there was, if you listened to radio, you would hear a Motown song followed by a country song followed by a rock and roll song. But you know, it would be the Mamas and the Papas, and then the Lovin' Spoonful, and then the Four Tops, and then, you know, there was just, it was a real, really rich time in music, and there, at the same time, all genres of music were starting to comment very heavily on the culture and what was going on, which was the Vietnam War, and, you know, gay rights and women's rights and civil rights. And so it makes it an incredibly interesting and diverse time musically.
What's the tie-in with the Lonesome Traveler?
Well, it's sort of the second half. Lonesome Traveler was about the folk music, and then out of folk music came what they called folk rock, because the early stuff was like the Byrds, great example. They took a Dylan song, and they also took a Pete Seeger song, Turn, 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 was written by Pete Singer, and they put electric 12-string on it and these big harmonies, and so they called it folk rock.
And what is your responsibility?
As little as, oh no, I am co-creating and I'm the musical director.
And just a quick overview of the project. What's happening this week, and what is your intent here?
This week we're trying to get, we're coming back in May to do a kind of reading of for some public, you know, invite some people in to see what we're working on, and we need to get enough songs to get, not the whole show, but a sampling of stuff to sort of see where it's going and get a little feedback from people and see how it's going.
Great, thank you.
All right.